My dad's name was on a $90,000 car loan for my brother. Neither of them told anyone in our family for over 2 years. I found out by accident on a random Thursday morning, and by the end of that same week, my entire family was at war. My name is Rachel. I'm 34. I'm a licensed physical therapist. I work full-time at a rehab clinic, and I've been the responsible one in my family for as long as I can remember. Not because I'm perfect, just because I always had to be. My dad, Gary, is 61. He retired early from his job as a city building inspector about 4 years ago. He and my mom, Linda, have been married 38 years. After he retired, Dad always acted like money was tight. He told us he and Mom were living off savings and his pension, and they had to be careful. I believed him completely. My brother Drew is 30. He lives about 40 minutes from my parents' house. Drew is the classic golden child, and I don't use that term lightly. Dad coached his little league, went to every single college baseball game, co-signed his first apartment lease at 22, and paid off a $7,200 credit card debt Drew racked up partying too hard at 24. Mom always had an explanation. Drew had a rough time. Drew was finding himself. Drew needed a little extra support. I tried not to be resentful about it. I paid my own way through college with student loans and a part-time job at a grocery store. I bought my own first car, a 2011 Honda Civic with 68,000 miles on it, $9,800, loan in my own name. I never asked Dad for money because the one time I did, I was 26 and my car needed a $1,400 transmission repair. He said he and Mom just didn't have it right now. I borrowed from my friend Vanessa instead and paid her back in 3 months. Dad and I were still close though, or I thought we were. He called me every Sunday morning. We had a standing lunch the first Saturday of every month at a diner near his house called Patty's. He'd get the meatloaf, I'd get the chicken sandwich, we'd split a slice of pie. He told me things he didn't tell Mom. He told me he was worried about Drew's spending habits. He told me he thought Drew's ex-girlfriend had been manipulative. He told me he was proud of how I'd built something real for myself. I believed him. That's the part that still gets me. So here's the moment everything changed. It was a Thursday in early March. My parents had driven down to Florida for 2 weeks to visit my mom's sister, and they'd asked me to stop by the house while they were gone to water Linda's plants and grab the mail. Normal stuff. I have a spare key. I went over on day 3, did the plants, grabbed the mail stack from the box, set it on the kitchen table. I wasn't going to look through it, but one envelope slid off the pile and landed on the floor, and when I picked it up I saw it wasn't sealed. The adhesive had just dried out. The flap was wide open. I looked. I know some people would say I shouldn't have. I looked. It was a loan statement from a finance company called Meridian Capital. Primary borrower, Andrew M. Calloway, that's my brother. Co-signer, Gary T. Calloway, that's my dad. Original loan amount, $89,400. Statement date, February of this year. Remaining balance, $71,350. I stood in my parents' kitchen for a full 30 seconds without moving. I flipped back to the front page. Loan origination date, January of 2 years ago. 26 months ago, my dad had co-signed a nearly $90,000 loan for my brother. The monthly payment was $1,640, and all correspondence was listed to my parents' home address, not Drew's, which is why the bill was landing here. I took a photo of the statement, front and back, put it back in the envelope, set it back on the pile. Then I drove home and sat in my car in my own driveway for 20 minutes. That night I looked it up. Drew drives a 2023 Land Cruiser Heritage Edition. I'd seen it in his driveway plenty of times. I assumed he was leasing it or had gotten some incredible deal. He's a regional sales rep for a medical device company. He makes decent money, maybe $75,000 a year base. But an $89,000 loan on that salary alone? He couldn't have gotten approved. He needed Dad's name on it. And my dad, the man who told me he didn't have $1,400 for my transmission 4 years ago, had his name on a $1,640 monthly car payment. I didn't call Dad while he was in Florida. I wanted to. I almost did, probably 7 times over those 2 weeks. But I needed to do this in person. I needed to see his face. The day after he got home, I called and asked if I could come over for dinner. He said of course. Mom made pasta. We ate, we talked about Florida. Mom showed me photos on her phone. Then Mom went to wash dishes, and it was just me and Dad at the table, and I set my phone down in front of him with the photo of the loan statement pulled up. He looked at it. His face didn't change the way I expected. No going pale, no stammering. He looked at the photo, then he looked at me and he said, "Where did you get that?" Not "I can explain," not "I'm sorry, where did you get that?" I told him the envelope had fallen open. I told him I'd seen everything. Then I asked him why he'd co-signed a $90,000 car loan for Drew, why he'd hidden a $1,640 monthly obligation from everyone, and why, when I needed $1,400, he'd told me he didn't have it. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Drew needed help, and I knew you'd be fine on your own." I need you to sit with that sentence. Drew needed help, and I knew you'd be fine on your own. That was the whole explanation. That was it. I asked if Mom knew. He said not exactly. He'd handled the finances and she didn't look into it. I asked what would happen if Drew defaulted, if his credit would tank, if Mom would find out that way. He said Drew had never missed a payment. Like that was the point. I got up, picked up my phone, told him I needed time to think, and left before Mom came back from the kitchen. I sat in my car in their driveway and called Vanessa, told her everything. She said, "Oh, Rachel, no." That's when I started crying, because she got it immediately and my own father had just shrugged. Vanessa has been my best friend since college. She's 35, she's sharp, and she doesn't soften things. She told me that night to stop trying to make sense of it emotionally and start asking practical questions. What was the actual financial exposure? Was Dad's retirement secure? Was Mom going to get blindsided? Those questions sent me down a 3-day rabbit hole. I called Dad and asked if we could meet at Patty's. He agreed. When he got there, I didn't order food. I had a notepad. I asked him to walk me through all of it because I was worried about Mom's retirement being affected. He paused a long time, and then it came out. The car loan wasn't the only thing. 18 months ago, Dad had also given Drew $22,000 in cash, a personal loan, no paperwork, just a direct bank transfer, to help with the down payment on Drew's house. Drew owns a house. A nice one, 4 bedrooms, in a suburb with good schools. Dad had also made $8,500 in direct credit card payments on Drew's behalf over the past 2 years, just a few times when Drew got tight, Dad said. So the full picture: $89,400 car loan cosign, $22,000 cash transfer, $8,500 in direct credit card payments. That's $119,900 in 2 years. My dad is 61 years old, living on a city pension and savings. In 2 years, he had committed or transferred nearly $120,000, hiding all of it from my mother and never mentioning it to me, to my brother, who drives a Land Cruiser and owns a 4-bedroom house. I put my pen down. I asked if Mom knew about the $22,000 or the credit card payments. He said no. He said he'd handled it from a personal savings account he'd had before he and Mom married, an account she knew existed but didn't track closely. Not a joint account. Technically, legally, his money. He said that like it was supposed to make me feel better. I asked him, if Drew defaults on the car loan, what's your plan? He said Drew wouldn't default. I asked again. He looked out the window and said, I'd figure it out. With what? The savings he'd already drained by $30,000 in cash and payments. His pension that wasn't enough to cover a $1,640 monthly car payment on top of their living expenses. I left Patty's without saying goodbye. I called Drew on the drive home. He picked up on the second ring. I told him I knew about all of it, the car loan, the $22,000, the credit card payments. He was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then he said, Dad wasn't supposed to tell you that. Not a denial, not an apology. Dad wasn't supposed to tell you. I told him Mom didn't know, and that she had a right to know about anything that touched their finances. Drew said, don't drag Mom into this. This was between me and Dad. I told him he'd made it everyone's business the second he let Dad co-sign a loan that put Dad's credit and retirement on the line. Drew said I was making this into something it wasn't, and that Dad had offered, Drew hadn't forced him. He wasn't wrong about that last part, which made the whole thing more complicated, not less. I spent 2 days deciding what to do about Mom. Vanessa said I had to tell her. Your mom is making retirement decisions without knowing that $120,000 has already left the picture. That's what decided me. Mom has her own small pension from years working as a school administrator, but her plan had always been that she and Dad's combined savings would carry them through. If Dad had quietly hollowed out a huge chunk of that, she needed to know. I called Mom on a Saturday morning and asked if I could come over. She was happy about it. When I got there, Dad was home. I'd expected him to be at his golf league. He was sitting in the living room, and the look on his face told me he knew exactly why I was there. I sat down with both of them. I told Mom everything. The car loan, the $22,000, the $8,500. I showed her the photo on my phone, told her Dad had confirmed all of it at Patty's. Mom looked at Dad. She didn't yell. She got very still and very quiet, which is actually worse with my mom. She asked him if it was true. He said yes. She nodded slowly, stood up, walked into the bedroom, and closed the door. Dad looked at me like I'd just set the house on fire. He said, "You didn't have to do that to her." I said she deserved to know the truth about her own money. He told me I'd blown up the family over something that was his business. I told him it stopped being only his business when he used their finances as a personal account for Drew. Then he said I was jealous. That word. I got up and left. The family blowback started that same night. First was my Aunt Carol, Mom's sister, the one they just visited, texting at 7:42. "Rachel, your father's finances are his business. You should have stayed out of it." I didn't respond. Then my cousin Britt, "You really hurt your mom today. She's been crying for hours. Are you proud of yourself?" Delete. Then Drew called. I let it go to voicemail. He left a 3-minute message saying I had no right to go to Mom, that I was weaponizing her feelings out of jealousy, and that if anything happened to Mom's health from the stress of this, it was on me. I saved that voicemail. I knew I might need it. Then the family group chat lit up. Drew sent a message at 9 p.m. "I'm devastated that this family can't communicate privately anymore. I hope everyone takes a breath." 6 people sent heart emojis. 6, including my mom, which hurt more than anything else combined. I left the group chat at 9:03. Vanessa came over that night with wine and a legal pad. She'd already looked up what happens to a cosigner when a primary borrower defaults. The answer was exactly what I'd feared. Dad's credit tanks, creditors can come after his assets, and depending on state laws and how aggressive the lender gets, they could potentially drag in joint marital assets that Mom co-owned. The $22,000 cash transfer was already gone, no paperwork, no repayment agreement, essentially a gift. The $8,500 in credit card payments was just gone. Vanessa said, "You need to find out if your mom has any legal exposure on that car loan." I hadn't even thought of that. Mom called me the next morning. I was nervous picking up, but she wasn't calling to yell. Her voice was flat and tired. She said she'd been up most of the night going through all of their accounts, and what I'd told her was correct. Then she told me something Dad hadn't. The personal savings account he'd used for the cash transfer and the credit card payments had originally had $58,000 in it at retirement. It now had $11,200. He hadn't just given Drew $30,000. He'd been feeding money to Drew in smaller amounts over a longer period. The $22,000 and the $8,500 were just the chunks I knew about. That account had lost nearly $47,000 in 4 years. Mom cried on the phone. Quiet crying, the kind where someone is trying to hold it together. She said she felt stupid. I told her she wasn't stupid. Dad had deliberately hidden it. She said she knew that, but she still felt stupid. She told me Dad had been apologetic, kept saying Drew needed it more and that he'd planned to rebuild the account before she ever had to worry. The phrase he used, she said, was, "It's handled, Linda." She went to stay with Aunt Carol for 3 days. I thought that was good for her. Here's where I made my decision about what I could actually do. I couldn't fix what Dad had done to Mom's retirement. I couldn't make Drew pay back money transferred with no paperwork, but I could make sure Mom had someone in her corner with real professional knowledge. I'm a physical therapist, not a financial planner. But I have a patient, I won't use her name, who is a certified financial planner, and over the years of her rehab appointments we'd talked a lot. I called her, explained the situation in general terms, and asked her to recommend a family financial consultant and, if necessary, a family law attorney. She gave me two names: Tom, a fee-only financial planner, and Diane, an attorney who specialized in asset protection. I passed both names to Mom. She made an appointment with Tom the following week. Then I sent my dad an email. Not a text, an email, because I wanted a record. I told him I loved him, but I couldn't continue our relationship as it had been while there was no accountability for what he'd done. Monthly lunches on hold, not answering his calls for the time being. I told him I hoped he'd be honest with Mom going forward and work with her on a plan to protect both of their retirements. I told him I wasn't doing this out of jealousy and that I wasn't going to keep explaining that. I told him when he was ready to have a real conversation, I was open to it. He responded 6 hours later with 2 sentences. "I'm sorry you feel this way. I hope you'll come around." "I'm sorry you feel this way." Classic non-apology. Then I handled Drew. I called him. I wanted him to hear my voice. I told him our relationship was over until he did 2 things: acknowledged to Mom directly what Dad had done on his behalf, and committed to a written repayment plan for the $22,000 transfer. I also told him I had the voicemail where he said that if Mom's health suffered, it would be on me, and that if he ever said anything like that again, I would forward it directly to Mom and Aunt Carol. He said, "You're being dramatic." I said, "Okay, we're done then." I hung up, blocked his number. Blocked Britt after she called me spiteful. I didn't block Aunt Carol because Mom was staying with her and I needed that line open. For 3 weeks, I was in a strange quiet. The family group chat kept going without me. Vanessa heard through a mutual connection that Drew was telling family friends I was having some kind of mental health episode, stressed from work, blew up over nothing. I don't know how many people bought it. At a certain point, I stopped caring. What actually shifted, everything happened about 6 weeks after I first found that loan statement. Mom went to see Tom, the financial planner. Tom told her something neither of us had known. Because the loan statement was being sent to my parents' house, and because the loan was originated with their home address listed as the primary mailing address, there was a paper trail that could be used to argue, in some financial and legal contexts, that the debt had been incurred with household participation. Tom stressed it wasn't definitive. But in a scenario where Dad's credit became impaired, or if there were collection actions, Mom could potentially get dragged in depending on state law and how aggressive Meridian Capital decided to get. Tom recommended they both consult with Diane, the attorney, to make sure Mom was protected. They did. I don't know everything that came out of that meeting, but I know the result. Diane sent a formal letter to Meridian Capital requesting all future correspondence be directed to Drew's address, cutting the link to my parents' home. She also drafted a document, signed by Dad, that acknowledged the $22,000 transfer to Drew and characterized it as a loan with a repayment schedule. Drew had to sign it too. He signed it. 3 years, $617 a month. I don't know if Drew will actually pay all of it back, but the document exists. That's something. Dad also sat down with Mom and walked through every transaction from that savings account over the past 4 years. Full picture. $46,800 transferred or paid out to Drew, either directly or through credit card payments. Plus the $89,400 cosign loan, still sitting at $71,350. The personal savings account that had $58,000 at retirement now had $11,200. Mom's own savings were untouched. Dad hadn't touched those. But the combined cushion they'd planned their retirement around had a $47,000 hole in it. Mom told me this on the phone. She wasn't crying this time. She sounded tired but clear. She said she and Dad were working with Tom on a revised retirement plan. Dad had agreed to no more financial transfers to Drew without her knowledge and sign-off. And Drew had called her and apologized, a real apology, she said, not a non-apology, and acknowledged that he'd put Dad in a position that wasn't fair to the family. I asked how she felt about all of it. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "I feel like I've been asleep and now I'm awake. It's uncomfortable being awake, but it's better than sleeping." That hit me. My mom is sharp. She'd just been trusting, and Dad had used that trust. She asked if I'd consider coming to Sunday dinner. I said yes, but not yet. I said I needed a little more time. Dad sent me a real email about 6 weeks after my first one to him. Not, "I'm sorry you feel this way." An actual email, 3 paragraphs. He acknowledged hiding the loan. He acknowledged the $46,800 in transfers was wrong to hide. He said he'd told himself he was protecting me from worry, but he knew that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was that he knew I'd push back and he didn't want the confrontation. He said he'd told Drew his whole life that things would work out, and somewhere along the way, he'd started covering for Drew instead of letting Drew face consequences. He said he didn't have a good excuse for telling me he couldn't help with my transmission while doing what he did for Drew. He said he was sorry. I read it 4 times. I showed it to Vanessa. She read it and said, "It's a real apology. It doesn't fix anything, but it's real." I responded 2 days later, short. I said I appreciated it and I believed he meant it. I said I wasn't ready to go back to how things were, but I was open to talking. I suggested we meet at Patty's, not our usual lunch, just to talk. He said yes. We went, he got coffee, I got tea, we sat there for an hour and a half, it wasn't comfortable. He cried a little, which I've only seen twice in my life. I didn't cry, I was too tired, but I listened. He talked about how when Drew was a kid, Drew had genuinely struggled, anxiety, social stuff they'd never really named, and Dad had gotten into the habit of smoothing things over for him, and it had just never stopped. He said he knew it had hurt me and he was sorry. I told him I wasn't going to pretend the transmission thing didn't happen. He said he knew. He said he should have found the money. I told him that wasn't even the whole point. The point was that he'd looked me in the eye and lied, and I needed to know that wasn't going to happen again. He said it wouldn't. I don't completely believe him yet, but I'm trying. As for Drew, we're not close. That's probably permanent. We text occasionally if there's a family event coming up. He is paying the $617 a month on the repayment schedule. I confirmed that with Mom. Whether it continues, I have no idea, but right now it's happening. Drew still has the Land Cruiser. I'll be honest, every time I see it in my parents' driveway when I come over for dinner, I feel something. Not jealousy, just the weight of knowing what that car actually cost. Not $89,400, more like a few years of my family trusting each other. Vanessa came over for dinner at my place last week. We talked through the whole thing, from that open envelope on my parents' kitchen table to where everything stands now. She said, "You know, most people would have just let it go because it was easier." She's right. I could have put that envelope down and walked away. I could have told myself it wasn't my business. But my mom's retirement is my business. Her financial security is my business. And when someone I trusted looked me in the eye and said, "I don't have it," while carrying a $1,640 monthly payment for my brother, that became my business too. I'm not at a place of everything is fine with my dad yet, but we've had 4 lunches at Patty's since that first awkward coffee. He's been honest with me as far as I can tell. He's been honest with Mom. That's what I asked for. My life is genuinely fine. I just renewed my lease. I got promoted to lead therapist at my clinic 3 months ago, $12,000 raise. I'm putting $800 a month into my own retirement account and $400 into savings. Nobody is co-signing anything for me. I'm building my own thing, the way I always have. The story doesn't have a clean ending. Families rarely do. But the truth is better than the alternative, even when the truth is messy and painful and makes Sunday dinners uncomfortable for a while. So tell me, if you'd found that loan statement, would you have said something, or would you have put the envelope down and walked away? Drop it in the comments.